Now I'm really excited to see this little Fiat 124 Sport. I've never actually seen this car in the flesh before, but I've known about it for years. This is a real cool piece of New Zealand motor racing history. It was raced back in the 1970s in the New Zealand Saloon Car Championship by a guy called Glenn McIntyre. The car is, as it was in the 70s, including the fender flares, the beautiful knockoff wheels, and this fairly unique shade of green. It was actually sponsored in period by a timber merchant called Odlands, and these were their colours. By coincidence, my dad was a truck driver for Odlands. He drove a truck for Odlands back when I was a kid, and I thought this colour, this shade of green, looked pretty awful on his truck, but somehow it really works on this Fiat. If you look on the front fender here, you will see Wilson Motors Hunterville. Now, Bruce Wilson ran a garage out of the small North Island town of Hunterville, which is actually not far from here. And back in the 60s and 70s, he prepared a bunch of cars, including those for Chris Amon. And I've got a real cool old photo of the inside of his garage from the early 1960s. And you can see Amon's Maserati 250F plus his Cooper. And there's also a Ferrari 555 Super Squallow. And these were all just old race cars at the time, basically sitting around gathering dust. You'd assume that this Monza was built by Decon Engineering, but it wasn't. Decon built most of these tube frame Monzas back in the 70s, but this car was actually built in 1975 by Jerry Monk for Jim Truman. And among the various people who raced this car in period were Bobby Rahal and Don Yenko. In fact, Yenko actually owned the car for a time. Competed in period in both IMSA and Trans Am, and it's pretty cool, pretty unique to have it here in New Zealand. Interesting Mazda RX-7 here. I don't really know much about this car, but it's amazing what turns up at these events. The SCCA GT3 lettering on the door suggests this is an old Sports Car Club of America car, probably with history going back to the early 1980s, I would guess. GT3 is what B Sedan basically evolved into in about 1980 or so. So man, this thing is pretty cool. Cool old rally car here. This is Andrew Johnson's Datsun 1600, or 510 as these cars are referred to in the USA. This car competed in the 1975 Heatway Rally, which was a brutal endurance rallying event that took place from one end of New Zealand to the other back in the 1970s and 80s. Amazing old survivor. Pretty cool history too. This car may look familiar to some of you. This is Dennis McConnell's Mark I Escort, BDG powered. Lots of history here. This was raced in period by Don Halliday from the late 1960s through to the early 70s. Won a couple of national titles. This is a pretty rare car, Alfa Romeo Montreal. There were only about 3,900 of these cars ever made, and it's kind of mad to see one being raced, but here it is. Now, the engines in these things are an absolute work of art. 2.6 litre, 2600cc, 90 degree double overhead cam V8 with dry sump system and fuel injection as standard. And wow, what a lovely car. This is a Triffid, a New Zealand special built in the early 1970s. Actually runs inline 6 Ford Falcon motor. Jowett Jupiter. These were sold new in New Zealand back in the 50s. Pretty common on racetracks back then, but not so much anymore, obviously. Another of the New Zealand specials, the JRM. Built around 1967, 68, I believe. Nice lineup here of vintage Formula Fords, Reynard, Van Diemen, number 14 there is a Mirage, 911 is a Palliser. Another of the New Zealand specials here. This is a U2, but it was built in period by Graham McRae, who went on to be quite a successful car constructor, and as a driver reached Formula 1. 128 here, I think, is a buckler. Some Formula Juniors. These were really popular in New Zealand in period and now in historic racing. This is a Talisman, Brabham BT2 parked in front of it here. And just across the way we've got a Lotus 18, again another Formula Junior. And over in the corner there is a Terrapin. It's a mid-engine car, but it's actually got the engine and driveline from a Mini stuffed in the back.